It's the last weekend in May. In my village, that means two things. It's our Highland Games. And it might rain. But through the glen from us, there's another big event going on. And I'm going to take you to both to answer the question, where do clans really come from? So if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. Blackford Highland Games, the last Saturday of every May. You should come. It's a great day out. You'll find heavyweight competitions, dancing, kilts and bagpipes. All the stuff that you'd find in a tartan shortbread tin. You'll also find some of the locals in the beer tent, folks from neighbouring villages popping across, folks wandering around and socialising. But what you won't find is something I saw when I filmed a video at Highland Games in Canada. There's no clan alley with tents for various different clans. It seems that there's been a change in the nature and idea of clans through the years, and shortbread today might come in slightly different looking tins. Now, this got me thinking, because just through the glen, I've been invited to another event this weekend, and I think it's got something to teach us about clans. Are you coming? Through this glen and over the hill, you'll come to some place key to the formation of Scotland, and it might help us understand a little bit more about the arrival of its clans. Now, in case you hadn't worked it out, I'm heading for Dunfermline. But not only just now, I'll be bringing my live stand-up show Scotland Made the World to Dunfermline on the 7th of November 2025. The show takes you from the 15th century to the modern day to explain Scotland's impact on the world, with a lot of jokes and a wee bit smut along the way. It'll be all over Scotland, then in Canada, so for dates and tickets, click the link top right or in the description below, or go to www.brucefummey.co.uk. This is Bruce Day, and no, it's not all for me. Now, you might see stone lifting, you might see the beer tent, and you're thinking, aha, another Highland Games. Then you might look at the jousting and the battle reenactment and the medieval music and merchandise and think, hold on, that's got nothing to do with clans. But you'd be wrong. You may not have expected a video about clans to feature medieval knights and jousting, but we're going back to our roots. And this is another annual event that you really should come to here in Dunfermline. Now, it makes sense for Dunfermline to have a Bruce Day. There are Bruce lands nearby. The most famous Bruce is buried in the Abbey. But also, Dunfermline and its Abbey were a key focal point for Scotland at just the period that the roots of many Scottish clans were being formed. The Canmore dynasty. You see, many of our clans emerged from the very Norman knights who were gaining lands and leadership during that time. Now, I've made videos about Dunfermline Abbey in the past and how important it is to our history, and I'll have mentioned that, like many of our great abbeys, it was established by David I. Now, I'm not going to repeat all that. You can watch my video entitled, "Is This the Most Important Place in Scottish History?" I kind of gave away the location, didn't I? The key point is that David I brought about a revolution in Scotland, and it gives us the origins of so much of our culture through the ages. He introduced three things in particular that revolutionised the country. He established loads of abbeys. Now, they weren't just religious centres, they were centres of learning, administration, record keeping, and of course, the abbeys had lands. so they were a focus for agricultural development and improvement. Now, given that the economy was predominantly agricultural, that's like having the church, the university sector, the civil service, R&D and economic output of the country all in one place. So David's motivation for building abbeys wasn't just piety. The thing that abbeys didn't do was trade and commerce. And so, the second thing that David did was to establish burghs that were licensed to hold regular markets and fairs. This brought people together in various key locations in order to trade and drive local and international commerce. And with it all in one place, David could tax it. Here in Dunfermline, he built an abbey on the same site that his mother had established a priory. But he also established a borough where his father had based a royal seat. Now, it wasn't just here in Dunfermline, he did it up and down the country. Edinburgh, Jedburgh, Stirling, Perth and more. Monasteries and boroughs. But there's another thing that monasteries didn't do. Project military might. But you'll notice that the boroughs that I mentioned also had castles. Aha! But who was going to project that military might for David from these castles? Who were going to provide the political structure? The third thing that David did was to introduce Norman feudalism and knights to control the land. Now, the annual Bruce Day here in Dunfermline recreates that feeling in knights and market day commerce in the shadow of its famous abbey. And it does it in the park where you find the ruins of Malcolm's tower, Malcolm being David's father. What many of the folks who come to enjoy the fun of this Bruce Day won't realise is that they're also celebrating the Davidian Revolution. It had a huge impact on Scotland. What's that got to do with clans, I hear you ask? Well, I spoke about the Norman henchmen who David brought to impose his political structures. Who were the Bruces but the descendants of a kin group of one of those knights that David had brought from his own lands in Normandy? He was originally given the job of controlling Annandale, next door to those wild men of Galloway who at the time weren't yet part of Scotland. The man called Robert, who he brought from a place called Breeks in Normandy, was the ancestor of all the Bruces and the fourth great grandfather of our warrior king buried in the abbey here. But this wasn't the only knight that David brought to secure his political power. He sent a knight called Freskin to subdue the lands in Murray, whose king Macbeth had so recently been killed by David's father. Freskin did subdue Murray, and he took the name de Moravia, and it's from him that we get the Murray clan. Of course, if you've watched this channel, then you'll know that the great rivals to the Bruces were the Cummins, again brought by David from Bosc Bernard Commun near Rouen, or Comines on the French-Belgian border, depending on who you believe. I've heard competing claims, but the point is that William Cummin, whether Norman like Bruce or Flemish like Freskin, was Chancellor to David I and one of the wave of immigrants who arrived here, no doubt on small boats across the channel, thus giving us Clan Cummin. Did he stop at Flemish and Normans? Of course not. There were Bretons as well, like Walter FitzAlan, who became David's steward, whose son was also the king's steward, whose son was the king's steward as well. And well, you've probably worked out that this gave us the stewards. And there's hundreds of them, branching off and breeding all over the place. Not only that, when the FitzAlans came, they brought some of their hangers-oners with them, like the Montgomerys. David also brought Simon de Ramsey, who gave us the Ramsey clan, and William de Graham to give us the Grahams, Gordons, Frasers, the Minguses from Meniere in Normandy, Innes, Crawford, Jardin, Hay, these are the tents here. The scenes that Bruce Day here in Dunfermline seek to recreate would have been very familiar to the progenitors of these Scottish clans, but over many generations would morph into the scenes at Blackford Highland Games. Of course, it wasn't just David, but also his descendants and later Canmore kings who established knights that would be progenitors of our great clans. David's descendants in that Canmore dynasty would extend Scotland's borders to where they are today as they pushed back the Norse. And the Norwegians finally gave up the Hebrides to the last Canmore king, Alexander III, in the Treaty of Perth in 1263. Orkney and Shetland were a wee bit more complicated. Of course, acquiring the Western Isles meant bringing in more kin groups. Clans in the Hebrides that didn't come from Norman French backgrounds, but from Norse. Clans such as MacLeod, MacDonald, MacDougall, and of course Irish connections gave us MacNeil, MacTavish, MacLachlan and Lamont. You might think that making this video was just an excuse for me to enjoy myself with 2 great days out. And there might be some truth in that. But it's also given the opportunity to point out that there's a line that joins this Bruce Day in Dunfermline to the Highland Games in my village through the Glen, and indeed across an ocean to the Coburg Highland Games I visited in Ontario. But this is Scotland History Tours, and I always want to give you a taste of cool places to visit and things to do. So if you're ever looking for a great weekend out at the end of May, then why not go to Blackford Highland Games and Bruce Day in Dunfermline. 2 fabulous events just half an hour apart where you can enjoy a great weekend out. But I can show you another fabulous place to go if you want to understand who was the daddy of the clans and the Lord of the Isles. That video is coming up on screen now. Support the channel by clicking top right to become a Patreon member or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, I'm Ian Dawkins, going to be a lamb alive. Sherry and Rasta.